Hey guys, welcome back to the Gimpy Gamer and turn 1 of my playthrough of Absolute Victory. To start things off on this one, I'm going to take and walk through pretty much the whole sequence of play, from start of turn to end of turn. In subsequent turns though, once we get past this first one, I'm probably not going to do too much in the pre-warfare stage and the post-warfare stage, because a lot of that's bookkeeping and stuff that I can basically touch on if it affects the game at the moment. But for those trying to learn the game, I'm going to walk through it on this first turn and kind of explain what you're going to expect during those segments of each turn. I've got a little list written down here. I'm just going to walk you through it. Starting off, you're going to do your roll for weather each turn. For some reason, they put this weather box on the Antarctic map. Personally, I wish they hadn't. Same thing with the reserve boxes here. Personally, I just put my reserves off to the side of the front card marker and not worry about that because it's just too much to worry about. And more than likely, I'm going to find a place to jot down this and put it somewhere else just so I can have the Antarctic map put away and just reference it when I need it. Stuff like the storm table, I can look up other times, and since I'm not using the Antarctic map in my playthrough, it really just is taking up a lot of table space I could use for other things. But for now, until I get that set up, I've got it on the board and using it to keep track. As you can see here from my first turn, I rolled a 4, and you use the event booklet for the axis to determine your little charts here. Let me take and move this. There we go. So you're going to look at chart 4 here, and it's going to show you what type of weather you're going to have in each area. It's rain, snow, mud, or blizzard, and rain and snow are synonymous in the rules, and mud and blizzard is synonymous in the rules. And the way they've decided to do this is all terrain has no effect as far as movement's concerned. Only weather affects it. So if it's fair weather in whatever zone you're in, it's 1 movement point. Rain or snow, 2 movement points. Mud or blizzard is 3 movement points. Also, if it's blizzard, ship movement is not allowed in sea hexes. It's considered to be frozen over, Arctic. The ships are locked in, and until the weather changes, you're not allowed to move ships in any way, shape, or form. And if the ship is in a coastal hex and an enemy ground unit moves into that hex, the ship is destroyed. The way they decided to do this as far as the movement from what the rulebook says is that because each turn takes 2 months, that the weather would change during that 2 months. They'd have some good, some bad. It might generally be fair or generally be rainy, whatever. But it's not going to affect the movement or the weather's going to affect the movement. But if there's a mountain there, they would have roads to get through. So instead of having to worry about terrain, it's just weather is the only thing that you have to worry about. 1, 2, or 3 movement points. Now the rest of it you can pretty much handle by just looking at the turn record track alone. You're going to take and remove any delay markers if desired. The delay markers I don't have pictured on here currently at the moment. Those are the markers you're going to have for Italy, USA, USSR, or Japan, and it's to record whether an event has them entering the war or not. You just place it wherever on the track, and at that point you can pull the marker off, and that country has the option to enter the war at their discretion at that point. After that, it says to check for the Chinese Civil War. That's not actually been published yet. That's going to be published later. I did actually hear back from the designer of the game on BGG. He says he's currently working on that, and keep your eyes peeled for it. If I hear anything about it, or if I find it and it does get published out there, I'll let you guys know about that. You check next for the Anglo-French Union. That just has to do with Britain and France, whether or not they're cooperating and working together. That is represented by one of these markers here. Make sure you guys can see it. Oh, there it is. All right, just one of those save markers, and you take and put that on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, that's where it was. You put that on your turn record track to show when the event starts. And the way that works is when Germany has invaded certain parts of Europe, you will take and roll a 1d6, and you count that many turns away, and that's when you place that marker down. And after that point, France and Britain are allowed to cooperate, which means they can take and use each other's ground units as air bases, use each other's planes, stuff like that. Next, you're going to check to see if you're reopening Pearl Harbor. I'm not going to get into Pearl Harbor currently because Pearl Harbor is just, it's deep. There's a mess load of rules involved with it. So I'll touch on that later when the Pearl Harbor event actually happens. I do have the U.S. Pacific Fleet station there. You have the option if you want to move it, but I want Pearl Harbor to happen, so I've got the fleet station there, so when that event does come up in my game, I'll slow this down and get into that specifically. Next, you're going to check to see if the U.S. Has entered the war, and you do that if Japan and Britain are at war. In a victory over Europe scenario, the USA enters the war automatically in January of 1942 to represent them coming in after Pearl Harbor. In a world in conflict scenario, the USA might not enter the war based off of that. They might enter the war earlier, later. Pearl Harbor might not happen. So you're checking to see if they're in the war at that point. If Japan and Britain are at war, the USA is allowed to roll and enter the conflict if they want. However, there is a penalty for the USA voluntarily declaring war on Germany or Japan, and that is the loss of their top 2 factories and a -2 on the presidential popularity to represent the fact that they're entering the war for political reasons rather than based on the fact that they were attacked. After that, you're going to apply any firepower upgrades that are applicable. That is these 2 markers here. I've got them stationed there just so I remember to put them on the right turn marker when it comes up. One is for USSR, the red one, and the green one's for America. And when they enter the war, you're going to count 9 turns ahead and place the marker at that point. It will change the firepower of their units when that pops up to represent their units getting better and improving over time. Both of them will improve from a 1 firepower to a 2 firepower at that point. You can also mothball ships at this point if you wish. It's an optional rule to use for your naval stuff if you wish. It's not something I think I'm going to use. I'll decide that at a later point because you can't do it until 1942 anyway. But what you can do is remove 1 ship, excuse me, roll a d6. On a 1 or 2, you lose the ship and you don't gain anything. On a 3 to 5, you lose the ship and you gain 1 tank or a plane on the next turn. And on a 6, you gain 2 planes or 2 tanks or 1 of each on the following turn. You can basically trade ships for land vehicles if you want to do that. After that, you're going to check for the victory disease marker. That is for after the USA has entered the war with Japan. You take and put that marker 2 turns ahead, and during that time period, no sea lift, land march, tack air, or ship may do anything in the Pacific theater. No UN or USA ship may do anything in the Pacific theater. And it's to represent the fact that the Allied forces were ill-prepared for World War II, and Japan was basically running amok during that time frame. So they get 4 months of free takeover time in the Pacific before the Allied players allowed to take and start fighting back. The last thing you do before the warfare stage is the U.S. election stage, which will only be done on game turn 8 and game turn 32. So I will do a separate video for the U.S. elections at that point. I'm not going to get into it specifically. After this, I'm going to do the actual warfare pulse stage, showing the unit movements and getting a little more in depth into that. After that, I'll do the post-warfare stage video separately. And then after that, each turn will more than likely just be the warfare stage with me just updating on anything important that happened in the rest of the turn sequence, so I don't bog you guys down with the minutia. If there's any specifics, like I know people will probably be a little confused on the election, since I'm a little confused on it. So stuff like that, Pearl Harbor, I'll definitely take and walk through when I hit those points in the game, so people will be able to see it. Other than that, though, I'm going to take and stick to just the action, the meat of the game after this point. All right, thanks, guys.